All right, Maureen, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
A deep dive into MCDP 1 to 4.
That's right, MCDP 1 to 4, the Marine Corps Doctrine on Competition.
Competition.
We know you're busy serving our country, so we're here to kind of break down this document and give you the intel you need to really put it into action.
Yeah.
Now, we may not have worn the uniform ourselves,
Right.
but we've
Yeah.
spent years studying military history and strategy.
Absolutely. And think of us as your civilian instructors
Right.
for this crash course in competition, Marine.
I like that.
And MCDP 1 to 4 really drives home this point that competition, it's not just about combat.
Right.
It's this constant back and forth that's happening all around the world all the time.
Yeah, it's like a game of chess,
Yeah.
but with higher stakes.
Absolutely.
And MCDP 1 to 4 is like the rule book.
It is.
It explains how competition, just like war, is a tool countries use to get what they want.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating how MCDP 1 to 4 highlights that even though specific policies might change with each administration, the US has these core enduring interests
Oh.
that remain pretty consistent.
Okay, so it's like the mission stays the same,
Right.
but the tactics evolve.
Exactly. And those enduring interests, things like protecting the homeland,
Uh-huh.
promoting prosperity,
Yeah.
and upholding constitutional values, they shape everything the US does on the world stage.
So as a Marine, understanding those big picture goals helps you understand the why behind your missions.
Absolutely. It gives context to your actions
Yeah.
and helps you make smarter decisions no matter where you are in the world.
Right.
But here's where it gets a little bit tricky.
Okay.
Even in a democracy like ours,
Uh-huh.
domestic politics
Oh, yeah?
can really impact how those interests are pursued.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah.
MCDP 1 to 4 even uses the example of how different branches of the U.S. government debate and influence policy
Yeah.
with each, having their own perspective and priorities.
It's like a three-way tug of war sometimes.
Totally.
And that same dynamic plays out in other countries too.
Yeah.
Understanding a competitor's internal politics is crucial.
Yeah.
Their actions are never just random.
Right.
They're often the result of power struggles and competing agendas within their own system.
So to really get ahead in this game of chess, as we were talking about,
Yeah.
it's not enough to just know what our goals are.
Right.
We also need a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
So competitive advantage just means being able to do something better than your rivals,
Okay.
something that gives you an edge.
Uh,
And MCDP 1 of 4 points out that the U.S. has a few of these advantages,
okay.
like a strong economy,
Right.
the influence of the U.S. dollar,
Yep.
and the ability to project military power globally.
Not to mention the reputation of the U.S. military.
Yes,
The professionalism and commitment to values are a big deal too, right?
absolutely.
You know,
But here's the kicker. Advantages can disappear if you don't maintain them.
oh,
The world is constantly changing,
yeah.
and what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow.
Right.
MCDP 1 to 4 uses a really interesting example to illustrate this operation outside the box.
Operation outside the box.
The 2007 Israeli airstrike on a suspected Syrian nuclear reactor.
I was going to say the COD Wars.
Oh.
That sounds like
Not quite.
something they left out of boot camp history class.
Yeah.
So what happened there?
So this was a situation where Israel was facing a serious threat from a potential Syrian nuclear program.
Right.
And to take out that threat, they launched this daring airstrike.
Okay.
But here's the strategic genius.
Okay.
They used cyber warfare to disable Syrian air defenses,
Whoa.
basically blinding their opponent before striking.
So it's not just about brute force.
Right.
They used brains to get the upper hand.
Absolutely.
That must have sent a real message.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It showed Israel's rivals that they were a step ahead, willing to leverage technology to achieve their goals.
Uh-huh.
And that brings us to another key takeaway from MCDP 1.4.
Okay.
The importance of viewing competitors as complex, adaptive systems.
Okay, I'm sensing a lecture coming on.
Right.
Break that down for me, Professor.
So think of it like this.
Okay.
A country isn't just a single entity, it's a system.
Right.
Made up of a bunch of interconnected parts, kind of like a machine,
Okay.
but more complicated
Yeah.
because it's constantly changing and evolving.
So we're not just dealing with a country's military.
Right.
There's their economy, their political system, their culture,
Yeah,
all these factors playing a role.
exactly. MCDP 1 to 4 uses Iran as an example,
Okay.
explaining how different power centers within Iran, like the supreme leader, the president, and the IRGC,
Uh-huh.
all have their own agendas and influence.
So even a seemingly simple decision,
Right.
like Iran making a move in the Arabian Gulf could be the outcome of some serious internal politics.
It's a power struggle behind the scenes.
Precisely understanding how that competitor system works.
Yeah.
The players, their motivations and their relationships
Okay.
can help you predict their actions and figure out ways to counter them.
It's like trying to figure out the enemy's playbook before the game even starts.
That's a good way to put it. And MCDP 1-4 argues that this kind of understanding is crucial.
Yeah.
For Marines operating in this competitive landscape, you can't just react to what's happening on the surface. You need to understand the deeper currents driving those actions.
So we've got these big picture goals.
Yeah.
And we need to understand how our competitors work.
Right.
But what are the actual tools we use in this competition?
Okay.
What are the means that MCDP 1-4 talks about?
Well, MCDP 1-4 breaks those means down to three main categories.
Right.
Attraction,
Okay.
coercion, and information.
Okay, let's unpack those one by one.
Right.
What's attraction all about?
So attraction is about using incentives and rewards to influence another actor.
To make it in their best interest to cooperate with you.
So is this like winning hearts and minds stuff?
It's similar. It's the carrot approach,
Okay,
not the stick.
got it. So things like bilateral training with allies, that's a form of attraction, right? Show
Yeah.
that we're on their side building those relationships.
Yeah, and there are broader strategies too, like NATO, the Fulbright program, or even favorable trade agreements.
Uh-huh.
They're all about creating partnerships and making it more appealing for countries to work with us.
I get it. Strength in numbers, shared goals, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
MCDP 1-4 actually uses a really interesting example of attraction in action.
Oh, yeah.
The Huk Rebellion in the Philippines back in the 1950s.
Yes, that's a great case study.
What happened there?
Basically, the Philippines was facing a communist insurgency.
Wow.
And the U.S. saw this as a threat to its own interests in the region, especially during the Cold War.
So what do we do? Just send in the Marines?
It was actually a much more nuanced approach. The U.S. combined diplomacy, economic aid, and military assistance to help the Philippines defeat the insurgency.
Oh, wow.
We trained and equipped their military, but we also helped them address the root causes of the rebellion by tackling poverty and inequality.
So it's a two-pronged attack, strengthening the Philippines from within while also giving them the tools to defend themselves.
Exactly.
Smart.
And it worked.
Yeah.
The Huk Rebellion was eventually crushed. The Philippines remained a U.S. ally, and American influence in the region was strengthened. It's a classic example of how a well-executed attraction strategy can be incredibly effective.
Yeah.
Especially against an insurgency.
That's a valuable lesson, especially for Marines who might be deployed to similar situations today.
Yeah.
Sometimes winning hearts and minds can be just as important as winning battles.
Absolutely.
Now, what about coercion?
Okay.
That sounds a bit more forceful.
Coercion is about using pressure threats or even limited force to influence an adversary's actions.
Okay.
Think of it as the stick to attraction's carrot.
Got it. So like when we position a MEU off a country's coast to make them think twice about doing something we don't want them to do.
That's a perfect example of deterrence,
Okay.
which is one form of coercion.
Uh-huh.
It's about preventing an action by establishing a credible threat.
So it's like saying, we're watching you and we're ready to act if you cross the line.
Exactly. The other form of coercion is compellence.
Compellence.
Which is about forcing an adversary to actually do something you want them to do.
Okay.
MCDP 1-4 uses the Suez Crisis of 1956 as an example of this.
Refresh my memory on that one. What happened?
So Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal,
Right.
a vital waterway for global trade.
Mm-hmm.
Britain, France, and Israel decided to take matters into their own hands and launched a military operation to seize the canal.
But President Eisenhower wasn't having it right.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He saw this as reckless and destabilizing, and he was determined to stop it.
So what did he do?
So he played hardball, threatening to sell off British bonds held by the U.S., which would have crippled their economy.
Oh, talk about using your leverage. It worked, though, right?
It did.
Yeah.
Faced with that kind of economic pressure, Britain, France, and Israel were forced to withdraw. It's a textbook example of compellence in action.
It shows you don't always need to send in the Marines to get what you want.
Right.
Sometimes economic pressure can be just as effective.
Yeah.
But MCDP 1-4 also points out that coercion isn't always a guaranteed win.
Right.
There's this idea of an asymmetry of interests,
Yes.
where a weaker nation can sometimes resist a more powerful one.
Right. It comes down to willpower.
Okay.
If a country is deeply committed to something, they might be willing to endure more pain, more risk, than a country with a less intense interest.
Makes sense. Think about those small island nations fighting to protect their fishing rights against huge industrial fishing fleets.
Yeah.
They might not have the firepower, but they sure have the motivation.
Exactly. And MCDP 1-4 uses the example of the Cod Wars.
The Cod Wars.
Between the UK and Iceland, to make this point,
Okay.
Iceland was determined to protect its fishing industry, which was essential to their economy.
Right.
And despite being militarily weaker than the UK, they stood their ground.
So they were outgunned, but not outwilled. They knew what was at stake, and they were willing to fight for it,
Yeah.
even if it meant risking a conflict with a much larger power. That's a pretty powerful message, especially for Marines who might find themselves facing similar situations.
Absolutely.
Sometimes David can beat Goliath if he's got enough heart.
He can.
Now, what about that third tool of competition information?
So information is all about shaping the narrative,
Okay.
controlling the message, and ultimately influencing how people perceive the world.
So in today's world, that's got to be a huge battleground, right?
It is.
With social media and 247 news cycles,
Huge.
everyone is fighting to control the narrative.
You got MCDP 1-4 stresses the importance of narratives in shaping how people interpret facts.
Yeah.
It's not just about presenting the truth. It's about framing that truth within a story that resonates with your audience.
It's like the old saying, whoever tells the best story wins.
Yeah,
And the Marine Corps itself has a pretty powerful story to tell, right?
it does.
That whole image of the tough, disciplined, always ready force,
Yeah,
it carries a lot of weight.
absolutely. The Marine Corps benefits from a narrative built on its history,
Right.
its professionalism, and its ability to adapt and overcome any challenge.
And that narrative acts as a deterrent
Yeah.
and influences how competitors perceive the U.S. military.
It's like a brand in a way.
Yeah.
The Marine Corps brand is all about strength, resilience, and commitment.
Yeah.
And every time Marines deploy, train, or engage with partner nations, they're reinforcing that brand.
It's like public relations for the Marine Corps, but it's the Marines themselves that are doing the PR,
Exactly.
not some, Madison Avenue advertising firm.
Right, but MCDP 1-4 also warns against a common pitfall in information warfare.
Okay.
Forgetting that different cultures interpret information differently. What works in one part of the world might completely backfire in another.
So cultural awareness is key.
Absolutely.
You can't just assume everyone will see things the same way you do.
Right, tailoring your message to your audience, understanding their values, their beliefs, their way of seeing the world, that's crucial.
So it's not just about shouting your message from the rooftops.
Right.
It's about whispering it in the right ear at the right time in the right language.
Exactly.
It's about being smart and strategic with how you use information.
Exactly. MCDP 1-4 actually gives an example of how deployed units can use DCO or defensive cyberspace operations
Okay.
to disrupt adversaries and shape perceptions at the same time.
Okay, color me intrigued. How do Marines use DCO in this way?
So think about it. Adversaries are always trying to hack into U.S. networks, trying to steal information or disrupt operations. It's a constant cyber battle.
Yeah, it's like the Wild West out there in cyberspace.
It is.
You gotta be on guard 24/7.
Right. So Marine units are using DCO not only to defend their networks, but also to name and shame the attackers.
Oh. They're publicly attributing attacks to specific actors,
Okay.
exposing them to the world.
So they're calling out the bad guys, making them pay a reputational price for their actions.
Exactly. And this does a few things. It disrupts their operations, deters future attacks, and sends a message that there are consequences for messing with the U.S.
Yeah.
It also highlights the fact that actions in cyberspace have real-world effects.
It's a reminder that in today's world, everything is connected.
It is.
What happens online can have a direct impact on what happens on the ground.
Now that brings us to another crucial point.
Okay.
Understanding the spectrum of competition.
Okay.
MCDP 1-4 lays out this continuum, this range of activities,
Yeah.
from peacetime competition all the way to armed conflict.
Right.
It's crucial to understand where things fall in that spectrum, especially because the lines between peace and war
Right.
are getting blurrier all the time.
Yeah, it's not as simple as we're at war or we're at peace anymore.
Right.
There's a whole lot of gray area in between. Exactly. MCDP 1-4 explains that below the threshold of violence, we see things like economic competition, diplomacy, and information warfare.
It's like a constant game of maneuvering and posturing,
Is.
where countries try to outsmart and outmaneuver each other
Yeah.
without actually resorting to bombs and bullets.
Right, but as we move closer to the threshold of violence,
Uh-huh.
things get more aggressive.
Okay.
we encounter things like hybrid warfare,
Right.
gray zone tactics, and political warfare.
Okay, time for another vocabulary lesson, Professor.
Right.
What are those exactly?
So hybrid warfare is basically a blend of conventional and unconventional tactics.
Okay.
It's about using a mix of military and non-military means to achieve your goals,
Okay.
often in a way that's designed to be ambiguous and difficult to counter.
So it's like fighting a shadow,
Yeah,
an enemy that's hard to pin down and even harder to defeat?
exactly. Gray zone tactics are similar.
Okay.
They involve operating in that space between peace and war,
Right.
using actions that are provocative.
But fall short of outright aggression.
Okay, so it's like playing chicken with the other guy, but instead of cars, it's warships or cyber attacks.
That's a good analogy. And then there's political warfare,
Political warfare.
which is all about using information propaganda and even subversion to influence the political landscape of a target country.
So it's about undermining your adversary from within, sowing discord, and weakening their resolve without ever firing a shot.
MCDP 1-4 emphasizes that rivals often try to blur the lines between peace and conflict using these gray zone tactics
Right.
to achieve their goals without triggering a full-blown war. And a prime example of this is China's actions in the South China Sea.
Ah, yes, China. They've been steadily expanding their influence in that region,
Yeah.
building artificial islands,
Yeah.
deploying military assets, and basically saying this is ours.
But they've done it very deliberately, very strategically. Instead of going in with all guns blazing, they've adopted a strategy of gradualism and salami slicing.
Okay, I've heard that term before, but break it down for me. So think of it like this.
Okay.
They take small incremental steps, none of which individually seem like an act of war. But over time, those small steps add up to a significant shift in the balance of power.
It's like they're playing the long game, slowly chipping away at the status quo until they get what they want.
Exactly, and they've managed to do this in the South China Sea without provoking a major international response, at least not yet.
No.
It's a textbook example of how a rival can use gray zone tactics to achieve its strategic objectives.
And it highlights the challenge we face in responding to these kinds of tactics.
Yeah.
How do you draw the line? When do you push back? When do you risk escalating the situation? It's a tough call.
Now, MCDP 1-4 also discusses the importance of the threshold of violence itself as a tool of competition.
Wait, how can the threat of violence be a tool if you're not actually using it?
So think of it as a form of leverage, like that MEU positioned off a coast. The mere threat of violence, even if it's never carried out, can shape an adversary's decisions. It's about creating a sense of risk, a sense of potential consequences that makes them think twice before taking certain actions.
So it's like the old saying, speak softly and carry a big stick.
Exactly.
The stick is there and everyone knows it,
Yeah.
which makes the soft words a lot more persuasive.
Exactly. MCDP 1-4 explains that actors use posturing brinkmanship and limited displays of force to send these signals and influence their opponents.
So it's about establishing credibility,
Yeah.
making your adversaries believe that you're not bluffing,
Right?
and that you're willing to back up your words with action if necessary.
Precisely. And the Marine Corps is in a unique position because it operates on both sides of the violence threshold.
Okay.
They're trained and equipped for both conventional warfare and for operations short of war, like those deterrent deployments we talked about.
Right. So a Marine might be sent in to provide humanitarian assistance after a natural disaster,
Right.
which is below the threshold of violence, but then suddenly had to defend themselves against an attack.
Exactly. The situation can change in a heartbeat, and Marines need to be ready for anything, able to shift gears from peacekeeping to combat operations at a moment's notice.
It's about being adaptable, being flexible, being comfortable operating in that gray zone where the rules are constantly changing.
And speaking of changing rules, MCDP 1-4 really emphasizes the importance of initiative and rapid decision-making in this new era of competition. It's not just about reacting to what your adversary does. It's about dictating the tempo, forcing them to respond to you.
It's like that old saying, the best defense is a good offense.
Exactly. But MCDP 1-4 warns that rivals often try to create ambiguity and uncertainty to slow down our responses and gain an advantage.
Okay.
They use deniable actions, spread misinformation, and operate through proxies to make it hard to figure out who's doing what and hold them accountable.
So they're trying to throw us off balance, keep us guessing, and prevent us from taking decisive action.
Exactly. And that's where those DCO capabilities we talked about earlier can come in handy.
Yeah.
If we can quickly attribute an attack to a specific actor,
We can strip away their advantage and respond more effectively.
it's like having a good radar system if you can see the enemy coming. You
Yeah.
can get your defenses in place before they strike.
And MCDP 1 to 4 also highlights the fact that competition, unlike a single battle, can play out over months, years, or even decades.
So it's a long game, a marathon, not a sprint. But does that mean we can't ever sprint? What if we need to respond quickly to a sudden threat?
That's a great question. And MCDP 1 to 4 acknowledges that need for balance. It talks about opportunistic behavior,
Yeah.
where rivals exploit sudden changes in circumstances like pandemics or political crises to advance their own goals.
Right.
So we need to be ready to sprint when necessary, but also be prepared to play the long game.
It's like being a chess player who's also training for a track meet.
Yeah.
You got to have both speed and endurance to succeed.
And speaking of endurance, that brings us to another key concept, resilience.
Okay, so not just being physically tough, but mentally and emotionally tough too.
Exactly. MCDP 1 to 4 recognizes that competition is a grind.
There will be setbacks, there will be frustrations, and there will be moments when you want to throw in the towel.
But you got to keep going, right? Just like in a tough firefight.
Yeah.
Got to dig deep and keep fighting.
That's what resilience is all about, the ability to bounce back from adversity, to adapt to changing circumstances, and to maintain your effectiveness over the long haul.
And that applies to individual Marines,
Yeah,
but also to units and the entire Marine Corps as an institution, right?
absolutely. MCDP 1 to 4 stresses the importance of developing resilient leaders who can inspire their Marines, foster a cohesive team spirit, and create a culture of resilience within their units.
So it's not just about being tough. It's about building a team that's tough together.
Yes.
A team that can support each other and overcome any challenge.
That's a great way to put it. And with that, I think we've covered the key concepts from Chapter 2 of MCDP 1 to 4.
Awesome.
What are your main takeaways so far?
Well, it's definitely opened my eyes to how much more there is to competition than just fighting battles. It's about understanding the bigger picture, the political and economic factors,
Yeah.
and the different tools we can use to influence the situation.
You've hit the nail on the head. Competition is a complex and multifaceted game.
Mm-hmm.
And MCDP 1 to 4 provides a framework for understanding and playing that game effectively.
And it's a game that every Marine is involved in,
Yes,
whether they realize it or not.
it is.
So the more we understand about the rules of the game,
Yeah.
the better equipped we'll be to win.
Exactly. And as we move on to Chapter 3,
Okay.
we'll dive into the contemporary competitive landscape and explore the specific challenges and opportunities facing the Marine Corps in the 21st century.
Sounds good. I'm ready for the next level. Let's keep diving.
Let's do it. All right, Marine, let's shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and talk about what MCDP 1 to 4 calls the contemporary competitive landscape.
Okay.
Basically, it's looking at the specific challenges and opportunities facing the Marine Corps in today's world. And trust me, things are changing fast.
Well, that's no surprise. Globalization technology.
Yeah.
Those are game changers.
Yeah.
It feels like the old rules don't apply anymore.
You're right on the money. MCDP 1 to 4 uses a term for this strategic convergence.
Strategic convergence.
It means different domains,
Mm-hmm.
political, economic, military, informational. They're becoming so intertwined
Yeah.
that you can't separate them anymore.
So it's not enough to just be a good rifleman or pilot.
Right.
You got to be able to think about how your actions affect everything else going on around you.
Exactly what you do on a patrol in some remote village
Right.
could have ripple effects on international relations or economic markets.
Uh-huh.
And the same goes for the other way around.
Right.
A cyber attack halfway across the world could impact your mission directly.
To talk about pressure,
Yeah.
what are some of the biggest obstacles Marines are up against in this environment?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is the rise of revisionist powers.
Oh, so-
Like China and Russia, they're not just competitors, they're actively trying to reshape the global order, pushing back against U.S. influence and trying to write their own rules.
So it's like a power struggle,
Uh-huh.
but with nukes and hackers involved. What's their game plan?
They're using a whole range of tactics.
Mm.
Economic pressure, information, warfare, military modernization.
Mm-hmm.
And those Grayson operations we talked about earlier, remember China's salami slicing in the South China Sea?
Yeah, they're slowly but surely pushing their way and testing the limits of what they can get away with.
Exactly.
And Russia's doing the same thing with their hybrid warfare in Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
Mixing conventional troops with cyber attacks and propaganda.
Uh-huh. It's like a whole new way of waging war.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they're not stopping there.
Okay.
Both China and Russia are pouring money into advanced weapons systems,
Right.
like hypersonic missiles and AI-powered drones.
Uh-huh.
They're trying to close the technological gap and erode America's military edge.
So we can't afford to rest on our laurels.
No.
We got to keep innovating and adapting
Yeah.
to stay ahead of the curve.
MCDP 1 to 4 makes that very clear, but it's not just about state actors anymore.
Oh.
Another challenge is the spread of advanced weapons technology to non-state groups and even criminal organizations.
So terrorists and cartels with high-tech weapons? That's a scary thought.
It is, think about it, drones are becoming cheaper and easier to acquire,
Uh-huh.
cyber weapons are accessible on the dark web, and even crude IEDs can be devastating.
Yeah.
This means the battlefield is becoming more decentralized and unpredictable.
Right.
You never know who you're going to be up against
Right.
or what kind of firepower they might have.
So the old ways of fighting the big battles like we saw in World War II,
Yeah,
those might be a thing of the past.
that's a real possibility. Future conflicts might be less about tanks and artillery and more about drones, cyber attacks, and information warfare.
Wow.
And this ties into another challenge. MCDP 1 to 4 highlights
Okay.
the increasing complexity of the operating environment.
You mean like having to deal with different cultures, languages, and political systems when we're deployed?
That's definitely part of it, but it's even bigger than that.
Okay.
Think about all the different actors involved in any given situation.
All right.
State governments, international organizations, NGOs, corporations, criminal networks, and even individual influencers with millions of followers online. They're all part of the mix now.
Wow. It's like trying to herd cats.
Yes.
How are you supposed to make sense of all that and make good decisions?
That's exactly the challenge facing Marines today.
Yeah.
MCDP 1 to 4 emphasizes that in this complex environment, you need to be adaptable, innovative, and comfortable operating with limited information. You can't wait for perfect intel. You have to be able to make decisions on the fly, adjust your plans as the situation changes, and be comfortable with uncertainty.
So it's like navigating a maze blindfolded. Sounds pretty stressful.
It can be, but it's also an opportunity for Marines to really shine, to show their resourcefulness and ability to think outside the box.
Okay.
And MCDP 1 to 4 doesn't just focus on the challenges. It also highlights some real opportunities for the Marine Corps to make a difference in this competitive environment.
Okay. I need to hear some good news. Lay it on me. What are our chances to come out on top?
Well, one big opportunity is the growing importance of the Indo-Pacific region.
Okay.
With China's rise, that area is becoming a focal point for global competition, and the U.S. is shifting its focus accordingly.
So it's like the new Wild West, but with island chains and trade routes instead of saloons and cattle trails.
That's a good way to think about it. And MCDP 1 to 4 recognizes that the Marine Corps needs to adapt to operate effectively in this vast and dynamic region.
So what does that mean? More Marines in the Pacific, new ships, different training?
It's all of the above. MCDP 1 to 4 talks about enhancing amphibious capabilities, strengthening alliances with partners like Japan and Australia, and investing in technologies that will give Marines an edge in the maritime domain.
Got it. So being ready to operate in that island-hopping blue water environment like we did back in World War II,
Yeah.
but with 21st century technology.
Exactly. And it's not just about being in the right place.
Right.
It's about having the right skills and mindset to operate effectively in this complex environment.
And speaking of being in the right place, MCDP 1 to 4 also points to the growing demand for expeditionary forces as an opportunity for the Marine Corps.
That's right. In a world that's increasingly interconnected and volatile, the ability to respond quickly and effectively to crises around the globe is more valuable than ever.
And that's where the Marine Corps shines, right?
It does.
We're the world's premier expeditionary force able to deploy anywhere, anytime, by air, land, or sea.
You've got MCDP 1 to 4 emphasizes that this capability is a huge asset in the competitive environment.
Yeah.
It allows the U.S. to project power, deter aggression, and respond to crises in a way that few other countries can.
So it's about being the 9/11 force.
Yeah.
The first responders when things go south anywhere in the world.
Exactly. And another major opportunity highlighted in MCDP 1 to 4 is the increasing importance of partnerships.
Well, in today's world, nobody can go it alone. We need allies. We need partners. We need to build coalitions to get things done.
That's exactly what MCDP 1 to 4 is saying. It emphasizes the importance of strengthening existing alliances and building new partnerships with countries that share U.S. interests.
So it's about working together, sharing information, coordinating actions, and presenting a united front.
Right. And it's not just about traditional military alliances anymore.
Okay.
It also includes working with NGOs, private companies, and even individuals who can contribute to U.S. objectives.
So it's about thinking outside the box, being creative, and building relationships with anyone who can help us advance our interests.
Precisely. And this brings us to another big opportunity: innovation.
Ah, yes. The need to constantly adapt and evolve to stay ahead of the game.
You got it. MCDP 1 to 4 calls for a culture of experimentation and risk-taking within the Marine Corps, where Marines are encouraged to challenge assumptions, explore new ideas, and find creative solutions to tough problems.
So it's not just about following orders, it's about thinking for yourself, being proactive, and coming up with new ways to do things.
That's the spirit. And this innovation applies to everything: technology, tactics, doctrine, organization, training. It's about constantly pushing the boundaries and finding ways to improve.
So it sounds like the Marine Corps is facing some serious challenges,
Yeah,
but also some incredible opportunities in this new era of competition.
that's a great summary. It's a complex and dynamic environment, but it's also one where Marines, with their unique skills and mindset, can really make a difference. Yeah.
Okay, I'm feeling pumped up. What's next?
Well, now that we set the stage, let's dive into Chapter 4 and see how MCDQ 1 to 4 explains how the Marine Corps can actually compete effectively in this challenging environment.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Let's keep going. All right, Marine, we're in the final stretch now. Chapter 7 of MCDP 1 to 4.
Chapter 7?
They call it conclusion, a call to action.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of it more as our pep talk before you head back out into the field.
I like that, a pep talk with some serious strategic thinking behind it. This chapter really brings everything together, highlighting what's at stake for the Marine Corps in this era of great power competition.
And they're talking to every Marine,
Absolutely.
not just the generals making the big decisions.
Every Marine, regardless of rank or MOS, has a role to play in this competition. Whether you're on the front lines in a support role or back in garrison, your actions matter.
It's like a team sport.
It is.
Everyone contributes to the win,
Right.
even if they're not the one scoring the points.
The chapter kicks off by reminding us that competition isn't going away.
Right.
It's a constant force in international relations, and it's only getting more intense.
So we can't just bury our heads in the sand and hope it goes away.
No.
This is the reality we have to deal with.
This is it.
Yeah.
MCDP 1 to 4 argues that the Marine Corps needs to be ready to compete, deter, and if necessary, win across the entire spectrum of conflict, from those peacetime engagement missions to all-out war.
That's a pretty tall order.
It is.
It means we got to be able to switch gears quickly and adapt to whatever the situation throws at us.
You got it. And that means we can't just focus on those big conventional wars anymore.
Right.
We need to be just as good at operating in that gray zone,
Yeah.
dealing with those hybrid threats,
Right.
and those situations where it's not clear if we're at war or not.
It's like being a boxer who can also wrestle and do judo.
Yeah.
You got to be able to fight in any style.
Exactly. MCDP 1 to 4 really drives home the point that Marines need a deep understanding of this competitive environment. They got to master the tools of the game.
Right.
And we all need to foster a culture of innovation and adaptability.
So it's not just about physical toughness and weapon skills.
No.
We got to be mentally sharp,
Yeah.
able to think critically and learn new things quickly.
Right. This document wants Marines to be intellectually curious, always learning, challenging the old ways of doing things, and pushing the boundaries.
So it's about having a questioning attitude,
Yeah.
not just blindly following orders.
It-
We got to understand the why behind the mission.
And that's where leadership comes in.
Okay?
The chapter highlights the need for strong, effective leaders at every level, leaders who can inspire, motivate, and get the best out of their Marines in this complex environment.
So those leadership traits we talked about earlier, strategic thinking, adaptability, relationship. Yeah. Building communication skills and resilience.
Yes,
Those are essential for any Marine who wants to lead in this new era.
absolutely. MCDP 1 to 4 is putting out a call to action here, urging every Marine to embrace this challenge, commit to excellence, and dedicate themselves to defending the nation.
It's like they're saying, this is your time, Marines.
Yeah.
Step up and show the world what you're made of.
That's the spirit. And it's not just about individual effort.
Right.
It's about working together as a team, as a corps, to overcome these challenges and secure a future for our nation.
So to wrap things up for our listener out there, what's the bottom line message of MCDP 1 to 4?
The bottom line is that competition is a reality, and the Marine Corps has to be ready to play the game. That means understanding the new rules, mastering the new tools, and developing the mindset and the leadership skills to succeed.
It's a challenge, no doubt, but it's also an incredible opportunity for Marines to showcase their skills, their toughness, and their dedication to the mission.
We're confident that you, the Marines of today, will rise to the occasion and carry on the proud legacy of the Corps. So go out there, make us proud, and Semper Fi.
Semper Fi, Marine.